From Washington, D.C., the United States Army Field Band proudly presents the rhythm section of the Jazz Ambassadors. As part of an ongoing series of instructional videos by the United States Army Field Band, we present the rhythm section of the Jazz Ambassadors in a discussion of rhythm section technique titled Understanding the Big Band Rhythm Section. The members of the rhythm section include Staff Sergeant Steve Cosper on guitar, Staff Sergeant Tom Williams on bass, the non-commissioned officer in charge of the Jazz Ambassadors, Sergeant Major Tom Dupin on drums, and the rhythm section leader for the Jazz Ambassadors, Sergeant First Class Fred Hughes on piano.
Welcome to Understanding the Big Band Rhythm Section. My name is Sergeant First Class Fred Hughes, and along with Sergeant Major Tom Dupin and Staff Sergeants Steve Cosper and Tom Williams, we hope to answer most of the questions you may have regarding the Big Band Rhythm Section. We've tried to cover the topics that are common problems among the high school and college bands that we've worked with in our travels across the country. We will be discussing some of the problems peculiar to each of the four instruments, as well as giving you some of the tricks of the trade to help you decipher your part. In order for our video to be of most value to the rhythm players watching, we will assume that the players have the following abilities. All players must be able to read music. That goes without saying. That's 100% of the job with the big band. We would like the guitar player to have a knowledge of chords and comping. Oh, by the way, if you don't know what comping means, it's the rhythmic and harmonic background that a guitar player and piano player create when they see chord symbols and slash marks. We would like the bass player to have a knowledge of chords, bass line construction, and acoustic and electric bass, although it's not necessary to be able to play both. We would like the drums to have a basic knowledge of the basic patterns, swing, Latin, rock, etc. The piano player to have a knowledge of chords, comping, and be able to read both treble and bass clef. If you don't understand some of the topics we're talking about, or you need to brush up on some of these topics, we refer you to our clinic books. A copy of our clinic book should have accompanied this tape. We've broken this video into three separate parts. Part 1 is titled The Relationship Between the Instruments. Part 2 is called Grooving as a Section and with the Ensemble. And Part 3 is titled Playing and Interpreting Your Part with the Ensemble. You may be wondering what the difference is between Parts 2 and 3. In Part 2, we will discuss how to play basic swing, Latin, funk, and ballad rhythms. You will hear them first with the ensemble, followed by a discussion of what we did and how to achieve these grooves as a section in a sectional. After we talk about sectionals, you will hear the rhythm section playing the same piece of music without the ensemble. Oh, by the way, whenever you hear me say the word sectional in this video, I'm referring to a rhythm section rehearsal. In Part 3, each member will explain how to interpret their individual parts and how they fit with the ensemble as well as the rhythm section. As a member of the rhythm section, you have a unique role. Not only do you function as the rhythmic and harmonic backbone of the ensemble, but you're oftentimes written as a member of one of the other sections, or accompanying a soloist, or any other situation the arranger writes for you. This requires a wide range of knowledge and skills to be called upon at any given time. Part 3 of our video is designed to hopefully get you started in acquiring these skills, as well as solving some of the difficult problems you may have reading and deciphering your part. Each member of the section will also talk about problems peculiar to his instrument and ways to get around these problems. We will also address the word fill as it pertains to each of our parts. We won't be discussing soloing in this video. Even though it's an integral part of each rhythm player's vocabulary, it is also a skill that any other player in the ensemble must possess if they wish to solo over chord changes. We will discuss improvisation in a future video. For this video, we will concentrate only on section and ensemble playing. In order to digest all the information on this video, we suggest that you view it in 3 separate sections. In this manner, you will be able to discuss and hopefully put into practice the suggestions and tips that we offer. Also, we suggest that each member of the rhythm section pay attention not only to the parts pertaining to their instrument, but all of the instruments. we feel that in order to play together as a cohesive section, each member must have an understanding of what the other member's job is. In other words, you don't have to be able to play the other member's part, but at least have some knowledge of how the other parts fit in the overall picture. So, while you're watching the video, if you have any questions about one of the other instruments, ask the person who plays that instrument to explain what we're talking about. Better yet, have them play it for you, then add your part, and then the rest of the rhythm section as well. Understanding, talking about, and playing grooves together is the beginning of really playing and grooving together as a rhythm section. Here's part one of our video.
When discussing the role that the bassist and drummer play together in a big band, the most important responsibility is the establishment of a well-defined and steady time feel. Even if both players have strong individual time, if there isn't a successful blending of time feels, all other musical aspects can suffer. While one isn't looking for a stiff metronomic feel to the time, the bassist and drummer must lock in together to provide the proper feel for the rest of the ensemble. The best way to ensure a strong time feel is simply by listening to each other. By tuning into each other's playing, each player can quickly determine the best way to musically support each other. For example, if the musical style of a certain piece is a swing feel and the bassist hears the drummer playing the basic time pattern on the hi-hat, then the bassist has the option to play in a 2-beat feel. Here's an example. If in the same situation, the drummer hears the bassist going to a walking 4 to the bar approach, the drummer will most of the time change the feel to a swing 4 pattern on the ride cymbal. This exchange of information must happen constantly, especially when group interaction is called for. Nothing is quite as frustrating as when a certain musical passage is being performed, such as a climax to a solo, and the rhythm section is not working together to support the soloist. In fact, everything that the bassist and drummer plays should be linked together with what the other musicians are playing. In any given big band arrangement, the responsibility of timekeeping can be shared or can shift many times to either the drummer or the bassist. Quite often the drummer has to kick or rhythmically support certain figures that the horn sections are playing. The drummer must often adjust the time feel to fit the style that the horn players are using. The role of timekeeping in this case falls to the bassist, unless the bassist is involved in the figure as well. If the bassist is involved in the solo figure with the horns and the drummer is not kicking the figure, then the drummer would take over responsibility of timekeeping.
We can't stress enough the need to work on keeping accurate tempos. A tune that noticeably drags or rushes will make the audience uncomfortable, even if they don't realize why. When you're working on technique by yourself, spend a lot of time using a metronome. Most of the electronic models have an earplug adapter and a flashing light, so you can stay with the metronome even when practicing loudly. Work on developing evenness of technique. You'll find that fills and time patterns have certain tempos that are the most comfortable. Work on keeping steady tempo at different volume levels. What feels comfortable to play at forte often becomes more difficult at fortissimo or piano. Don't neglect practicing softly. Everybody likes to work on speed and power, but playing a good groove and interesting rhythms is what the best part of drumming is about. The control and relaxation needed to play softly is at the heart of everything you want to do on drums. Think of it as cross-training. Also, practice at slower tempos. If you want to use ideas you worked out for one tune on any other music, you're almost certainly going to have to play them at a different tempo. Practicing at several different tempos will help you to not move the time on a tune to that one tempo you feel the most comfortable with. More importantly, perhaps, it will help you place the notes exactly where you want them. A rhythm, after all, is not so much what you hit as it is the space between the notes. On a swing tune, the pulse of the rhythm section is carried to the band and the audience by the bass line on the bottom and the hi-hat and cymbals on top. It's very important to develop a solid time feel with the bassist. If there's any doubt in the horn players' minds, they will probably go with the bass player, who is playing not only rhythms but pitches as well. In swing music, the bass player has 51% of the vote. You band directors out there need to spend less time yelling at drummers and more time yelling at bass players. Bass players who play mostly rock music seem to be more comfortable with a drummer that plays slightly on the front edge of the time. This is because in most music that uses even eighth notes, the drummer more or less has 51% of the vote. It sometimes takes a little while for the drummer and bass player to work things out, but steady tempos are the ultimate goal. Perhaps the hardest thing to do as a rhythm section player is to keep steady time when the horns are dragging or rushing. The tendency is to move in the opposite direction. If the horns drag, then speeding up slightly in the rhythm section only widens the gap. Try and stay right with the time. One last item. When you're backing a soloist or vocalist, most of the time it's your job to keep time for them and let them anticipate a phrase or lay back on the time as they want to. If you know that the melody in bar 5 of a tune is written right on the downbeat and you're just about to tap the cymbal on 1, and you know in your heart of hearts that the vocalist is not going to sing right on the downbeat, go right on with the time. The chances are excellent that the soloist is just phrasing things a little differently. Don't make them keep time for you.
What you just heard us do is what we call the Basie comp. It is a style of playing you heard on the opening tune, 1 o'clock jump, and is the most common type of comping done on swing tunes. In this type of comping, I play what we call the Freddie Green style of comping. I'll explain how to voice chords and set up your guitar to play this style more in depth in part 3 of this video. The Freddie Green style is nothing more than playing the chords 4 to the bar with the accents on 2 and 4. Playing the accents on 2 and 4 add to the rhythm that the drummer is playing on his hi-hat cymbals. By playing this style, I am adding a harmonic structure to the rhythm of the drums in the same manner that the bass does, but I'm also playing a rhythm that makes it easy for the piano player to play a more complex rhythmic style without getting in each other's way. One thing that we do have to caution piano and guitar players on, though, is correct chord voicings. It won't matter much if the guitar player is playing the Freddie Green style and staying rhythmically out of the piano player's way if the piano player does not pay attention to playing the proper chord extensions or is voicing chords in such a way as to conflict with the guitar player's voicings. The same holds true for the guitar player as well. Always make sure you are playing the chords and extensions that are written. Or if you want to change the extensions, make sure that the other chord players know that you are going to play something different. Playing together rhythmically can easily be ruined by conflicting harmony or voicings. As for voicings, a lot of times more experienced players won't need to even discuss this topic. After playing together, you get to know what the guitar player or piano player is going to do, and you just stay out of each other's way. However, one of the easiest ways to avoid getting in each other's way is to listen. Listen while you're playing to what the other player is doing. Listen to the range of the other instrument and complement each other rather than getting in the way. If the guitar player is playing in the middle range of the guitar, The piano player should now play in the middle range too, as this tends to make things sound muddy. Play something in the upper range that will add to the guitar. I can't stress listening enough. You have to hear what the other player is doing, or 9 times out of 10, you will get in each other's way.
Listening is a must in the second style of comping we call give and take. We call it that because that's exactly what we're doing. Rather than the guitar playing 4 to the bar Freddie Green style, he plays a rhythmic comp just like the piano. That is, he adds to the harmonic and rhythmic lines of the piece without sticking to 4 to the bar. This requires that the piano player and guitar player listen to each other, or it will sound like this. As you heard, we really weren't listening to each other and the resulting sound was chaotic. A lot of times, to make things sound not so heavy and to avoid confusion, we will take turns comping through sections of tunes. I might lay out during the first solo or first section of a tune. Steve will then lay out during the second solo or second section of a tune. Most often we don't even talk about these things. I'll look at Steve or he'll look at me, and one of us will stop playing. It will be best, though, for the younger rhythm section to plan these type of things in advance, but I think you get the idea. The most important thing we want to stress here is that if you're not going to play the bassy style comp, you must always listen, or one of you stop playing. Here's what it sounds like first with the guitar comping for a chorus, then the piano for a chorus, then both of us together. As you heard, that was a basic swing chart for the rhythm section. The guitar and piano switched back and forth between the give and take comp and the bassy comp. The reason for this is that some of the punches are written out in our parts, and it's easier to play off the ensemble for these and then go back into the bassy comp. It's effective, works with what the drums, bass, and ensemble are doing, and really makes the piece swing harder, especially when we go into the bassy comp. The bass is playing the walking bass line as well as playing the punches that are written. The drums are just playing time and setting up different punches as he feels appropriate. In the case of the Jazz Ambassadors rhythm section, we don't need to work in a sectional on this type of part. The music is something we've all been playing for quite some time, so we all know how our parts fit together and what each other does. For the younger rhythm section, though, this is a perfect type of piece to work on your groove. When you play this as a section, play it just as if the band were playing. In most cases, you will notice that you rush places like the anticipated part. Work on just those 3 bars, preferably with a metronome. Work on not rushing, play as a section. I want to stress that if each player has not practiced these 3 bars on his own so that his own internal sense of time is correct, it's going to make it difficult to solve the problem, not to mention wasting the other player's time during the sectional. Here's what I'm talking about. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that was good. Let's loop it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, we played it through twice. If we would have had a problem with it, I would have slowed it down until we got it right. Only after we got it right would we have looped it like we did. Looping the sections that you're having problems with is a very effective way of getting past problems. It keeps the problem coming at you, gets you used to the time, feel, and groove of the difficult sections. It is not effective if played at tempos that are not comfortable to all players in the section. If someone is having problems, slow it down until that person is comfortable, and then gradually pick it up to the performance tempo. After you've ironed out the tough sections of the piece in the manner that we discussed, play the entire piece. Make sure that the problem sections are corrected and really concentrate on the groove. One of the comments we hear from younger rhythm sections is, "We sound a lot better than that when we're playing with the band." Well, I'm here to tell you that that's just not true. If you can't groove and sound good as a section without the ensemble, you're not going to sound better with the ensemble. 9 times out of 10, you will sound even worse because of the problems are compounded by adding other parts that are playing different harmonies and rhythms to your part. Remember, we as a rhythm section are responsible for the time. If the rhythm section's time and groove are not together, then the band won't have the backbone it needs to groove. Here's the same section of Just Friends without the ensemble.
The funk groove I established on Changing the Weather has basic elements that will serve well for any funk tune. I use a 16th note rhythm, which I varied with syncopated staccato jabs. Here's what the style looks like on the page. Notice that I use only 3 or 4 note chords and I rarely sustain them. Here's how it sounds. Sliding into chords is another technique of the funk style. The half-step approach is my favorite. Remember that you don't need to play constantly. Also, you can mark time by muting the strings and strumming 16th notes in lieu of a rest.
One of the unique elements of a change in the weather is the use of a swingy 16th note feel. It is unique in that most funk or R&B styles use a straight 16th approach. For the bassist, it is now possible to incorporate elements from funk and swing styles. As you look at the chart, you find 16th and 8th note figures in the opening segment of the chart. From experience, this would tell the bassist that the basic feel of the chart will be in a rock, funk, or other straight 8th or 16th style. However, since the arranger wants a swingy feel, the approach to the basic note division, in this case the 16th note, will be altered. To let you hear the difference, here's a section of the written bass part using a straight 16th note approach. Here's the same part played using swingy 16ths. Because the chart has a swingy feel, the bassist can now add swing patterns and approaches to further support the swing feel. As I play the example, listen carefully to how the bass line interacts with the drum feel. Did you notice I was using a walking pattern of 8th notes? If thumping and popping are desired, the bassist will need to keep the swingy 16ths in mind and use them in construction of the bass patterns. In most rock and funk styles, the main instrument for the bass to lock in on is the bass drum, with the hi-hat and snare drum having a slightly secondary role. By locking in on the bass drum pattern while using the snare and hi-hat for reference, the bassist should be able to create a strong time feel or pocket with the drummer. Once the intended feel of an arrangement is created, the drummer and bassist should stay close to this feel. There are parts of an arrangement, such as the solo section, where the bassist can use a variation of the basic groove and focus more on interacting with the soloist. However, when the bassist encounters specifically written parts, it is necessary to return to the basic groove feel.
When you're playing a swing funk type of groove on the drums, the emphasis shifts from the right hand and left foot to the left hand and right foot. That means the volume shifts too. Bring the volume in your right hand down to let the bass drum and backbeat carry more of the load. Putting an accent on the closed hi-hat is often enough to set up the feel. Catching the important accents in the bass line locks the groove in even further, like this. Try and find the simplest way to get the groove happening. The rest of the rhythm section needs some space to work in too. Then, as your ear tells you, you can add some ornamentation. Remember, the groove comes first. Think more about listening than being clever. The second bar of this example is starting to get busy. You may want to save it for a place in the tune where there's enough open space for it to be heard clearly. Listening to some of the drum synthesizer programs used by rap groups will help you get a hold of this type of feel.
We discuss ways to work on difficult sections during Just Friends, and the same way of solving problems with difficult sections holds true here and any time you need to work on rough passages. Sergeant Major Dupin, Staff Sergeant Williams, and Staff Sergeant Cosper discussed the ways to achieve good funk grooves. I'm going to talk about how we put it together as a section, but before I do that, I want to address the piano part for this type of groove. Oftentimes, the piano needs to take a back seat to the guitar in this situation. Just like the guitar stays out of the piano's way in the bassy groove, the piano needs to stay out of the way of the rhythms the guitar is playing. Most often, as you heard in A Change in the Weather, I play sustained chords. Once in a while, I might add some rhythmic comp, but it has to fit with the rhythm the guitar is playing. The rule of thumb I use here is that if I'm not playing sustained chords or a written part that the arranger wrote, I add to what the guitar is playing, always making sure to stay out of his way. I think you will understand what I'm talking about when you hear us play in a few moments. As for getting a good funk groove established in a sectional, I think the easiest way is to start with the drums. Let him get the groove started, then add the bass. Make sure that the two of them are locking in. Many times, one or the other may be playing a little bit too busy of groove for what you want to achieve. Let them talk about it and decide who's going to play what. Sometimes it's as easy as the drummer hearing the bass line so he can match it or play around it with his bass drum. Other times you need to listen to a recording of a similar groove so you can match it. Either way, it's time well invested. Once the bass and the drums are locked into a good groove, add the piano. The piano part should fit right in because it should be a simple sustained part. Again, if it doesn't sound right, someone needs to change. After you've added the piano and he's locked into the groove, add the guitar. The same holds true here. If by adding the guitar, the groove isn't a groove anymore, someone needs to change what they're doing. As I said before, the best way to solve this type of problem is to listen to recordings. Attempt to match the groove on the recording. We feel that by layering the instruments in a sectional, as I described, is a fast and effective way to get everyone grooving, as well as finding out and solving problem areas. In this type of groove, the tendency with younger rhythm sections is to overplay. By layering the instruments, the members of the section get to really find out how the parts fit together and make it work. Here's A Change in the Weather without the ensemble. Pay attention to the relationship between the bass and the drums and the piano and the guitar. Listen to how these relationships make the groove work.
Performing with brushes is one of the great mysteries for young drummers. It's one aspect of drumming where listening to recordings becomes very important. Remember, no matter how many technical tips anyone gives you, listening to music and trying to imitate what you hear is the quickest way to pick up on style concepts. First of all, if your brushes look like this, throw them away and go buy a new pair. Brushes don't last forever. When you get a new pair, bend the tips slightly up, not too much. This will keep the tips from digging into the head. If you get retractable brushes and the inside shaft wiggles, bend it slightly. You'll need a rough-coated head on your snare drum to produce what's called the swish sound. If you like the sound a control dot head gives, they can be bought rough-coated with the dot on the underside. Here's the basic pattern I use, whether playing fast or slow. Think of tapping with your right hand next to the hi-hat when it closes on 2 and 4. Your left brush is fairly flat to the head and travels in a circle or an oval. The swish will be louder from 2 to 3 and 4 to 1, almost like playing a roll. I tend to add an extra smaller circle at slower tempos, but no two drummers play this pattern exactly alike. The key is to produce a rhythmic pulse. You can see why playing brushes is sometimes called stirring the soup. The band will be listening to the bass and the hi-hat for the time. When there are ensemble passages, stay mostly on 2 and 4 to help lock in the time. But playing with just the rhythm section and soloist, you can use the hi-hat in other ways. The tilter mechanism under the hi-hat lets the air come out from between the cymbals so they get a cleaner chick sound. You can use that slight tilt to create quiet splashes. Don't have the top cymbal clamped so tightly by the clutch that it can't ring freely. You can produce some nice effects on the cymbals with the brushes. One-handed rolls are possible by splitting the brush with the cymbal and moving up and down. Or you can fan the brush on top of the cymbal. If you use rubber-handled brushes, you can often avoid having to switch to mallets for a louder roll. If you use mallets, keep them on opposite sides of the cymbal for the best sound and to avoid cracking the cymbal at high volumes. How much of all this you use behind a soloist depends entirely on the context. You'll notice we implied short double-time figures or straight eighth figures in the middle of slow swing passages. This will become clearer to you as you listen to more recordings. Imitation of good players becomes even more critical in learning this style.
As you heard, the beginning section of Nightfall is arranged with just the piano, bass, and drums accompanying the sax. The piano and bass parts have chord symbols and slash marks. This means that it is totally up to us to decide what to play behind the soloist. To me, this is the most rewarding and fun part of the rhythm section's job. It is also the most difficult. A good way to look at it is your job to make the soloist sound good, which, incidentally, it is. If you don't listen and pay attention to what is going on, or if you play stylistically incorrect, the rhythm section, not the soloist, is to blame for a poor performance. It is important to always remember that you are supporting the soloist, telling the story with him. Because of this, you have to be comfortable with the chords and comping. We tell younger rhythm section players to work on their parts separately. Be really comfortable with your part. If you're scuffling to make the correct changes, you will really have a difficult time adding to what the soloist is doing, thus getting in the way rather than supporting. The second thing that needs to happen is to know each other. Know what the bass player is going to play at certain times, or know what the drummer is going to play when he starts a certain pattern or fill. A lot of times this is difficult for the younger rhythm section because of the school year situation and the fact that you don't play together all the time. We find that in these situations it is best for everyone to play a more simple style, with the piano player adding the fills and ornamentation behind the solo. In this manner, you don't get in each other's way, you provide good time behind the soloist, and you leave room for the soloist to tell his story. As you get to know each other and get more familiar with the piece of music, The rest of the section can start adding little fills and ornamentation to add to the excitement and groove behind the soloist. Remember though, you are accompanying the soloist. Tell the story with him, not against him. Here's an example of what we're talking about. You will hear us play the A section, or the first 8 bars of Nightfall, 3 times. The first time will be a more simple style without the solo. The second time, a more complex style without the soloist. And then we'll add the solo for the third time.
Now let's examine the guitar's role in the bossa nova style. Start with a rhythmic pattern and keep repeating it, adding small variations throughout. Now here's an example. This is a classic bossa nova style, and ideally, the other musicians in this section will be playing different but compatible figures. I'll demonstrate this first by myself and then add the full section. A good practice technique is to play a similar rhythm pattern using 2/5/1 chord progressions. Be sure to play at a variety of tempos.
Traditionally, the function of Latin music was to support the various dance forms of the different Latin cultures. Because of the strong rhythmic feel of these Latin dance rhythms, jazz musicians found that a number of these rhythms could be adapted into jazz compositions and arrangements. Because of the popularity of this Latin jazz blend, it has become essential for jazz musicians to be able to effectively play at least a few of the basic Latin rhythms. Two of these rhythms are the bossa nova and the samba. For the bassist, the basic bossa nova pattern consists of the root of the chord played on a dotted quarter note eighth note pattern of beats 1 and 2, and the fifth of the chord played on a dotted quarter note eighth note pattern of beats 3 and 4. The basic jazz samba pattern is a faster version of the bossa nova. Because of the tradition of layering instruments in Latin music, the bassist is expected to stay very close to the basic pattern of a particular Latin style. Another reason for staying close to the part is the fact that, as in funk styles, the bass drum pattern is almost exactly the same rhythm as the bass pattern. One quick note, it enhances the feel if the bassist gives each note full value, occasionally playing the eighth note shorter. Again, it is crucial to listen to the drummer's approach to ensure a solid, focused time feel.
People often speak of Latin music as if it were more or less all the same. If you'll look at this partial list, you can see there are many different traditional styles as well as new combinations of Latin fusion and Latin jazz. We're going to deal with just two of these that are commonly used in jazz, bossa nova and samba. Both of these are from Brazil and do not center around the clave pattern of Cuban and Puerto Rican styles. These two styles are very similar. Basically, bossa nova is a slower, quieter version of samba with a couple of accents removed. As Aerto Moreira explains it, bossa nova began with people getting together to play without playing so loudly that the neighbors complained. This meant leaving most of the different drums, cowbells, and louder percussion instruments out of the music and relying more on a shaker to quietly keep time. The Americanized version of bossa nova uses a steady right-hand eighth note pattern, usually with a brush on the snare. The left hand plays a cross-stick pattern that is similar to clave, but without the 2-3 of the clave. If you have any say in the matter, don't let anybody in the band play claves on a bossa nova. It clutters things up. Here's the basic pattern. The bass drum is played evenly without accents. After some practice, this pattern will become ingrained and easy to keep going. The hands play this basic pattern. You can add variations of all sorts to this. The left hand is not locked into a clave pattern. The right hand can play accents or rhythmic variations. To change into a samba pattern, begin accenting beat 3 on each bar. This imitates the surdo, a sort of cross between a floor tom-tom and a bass drum that's carried like a marching snare. Since the tempo of samba is usually faster than bossa nova, we drop a couple of notes from the right hand and it turns into a straight eighth version of swing. It looks like this. The left hand has as much freedom as in jazz, but here's one good basic pattern. There are many variations you can use. Traditional dance samba is more drum-oriented. Or a traditional samba school that dances in a carnival parade uses many different percussion instruments. A drum set can't cover all the sounds, so concentrate on a feeling of accenting beat 3 on the bass drum and do a lot of listening and experimenting. A good first step would be to go to a record store and look in the section marked International, or if you're lucky, Brazil, and buy an album that says something like Music of Carnival or Samba. These artists are also likely sources. David Byrne has produced several collections of Brazilian music. Lorindo Almeida is a guitarist in the bossa nova tradition. Look for something on a Stan Getz album to indicate that it's one of his bossa nova albums, possibly with Astrud Gilberto singing.
First, I'm going to talk about the bossa nova and samba groove as it pertains to the piano, and then we'll talk about grooving as a section on these tunes. There are several different rhythms you can play on a bossa nova and samba tune. However, if there is a guitar player, you must let him be the dominant rhythmic player, and the piano plays a sustained or light comp. If there is no guitar player, you can play the basic bossa or samba rhythm, which, by the way, for the piano player playing the basic rhythm is the same for the bossa nova or samba. Here's what I mean. If you wish to play more complex rhythms, I suggest you listen to as many different recordings as you can. Sergeant Major Dupin gave some very good artists to start with just a few minutes ago. As you will hear, there are many different ways to approach the Latin piano part. Pick one that works well for you, doesn't get in the way of the arrangement, is stylistically correct, and most importantly, it grooves. As for getting a groove together with a section, we suggest that you approach it in the same way we described in the funk section, layering. Let the drums start and then add the other instruments. Really work on making it smooth. Here's what we mean. Once you're comfortable with the groove, then work on difficult sections, looping small sections of the tune if necessary. For instance, the piano, bass, and drums have a difficult rhythm in the beginning of one-note samba. Here's a good way to work on the section. First, we would break the phrase into two sections. Remember, always work on problem areas at slower tempos, gradually increasing the tempo only when everyone is grooving at the slower tempo. We would work on the first phrase like this. Okay, first phrase, here we go. 1, 2, 2, 2. Okay, first phrase again. 1, 2, 2, 2. Before we move on, Sergeant Major Dupin's part obviously doesn't reflect what he's playing. He will explain why and how to interpret this type of part in part 3 of our video. Here's how we would work on the second phrase of this section. Okay, second phrase. 1, 2, 2, 2. Okay, second phrase, a little faster. 1, 2, 2, 2. Then we would put it together. Okay, let's put it together. 1, 2, 2, 2. Okay, a little faster. 1, 2, 2, 2. twice through. 1, 2, 2, 2. And then part of the chorus, making sure that the problem areas are just as smooth and grooving as the easy sections. Okay, let's put that together with a part of the tune. Let's take it from 39 to 61. Here we go. 1, 2, 2, 2. Here's what the entire segment you heard with the ensemble would sound like with just the rhythm section. I'd like to point out that if you're wondering why you don't hear the melody, that's because it's a vocal chart. The reason I chose to use it for this video was that it illustrates some key points extremely well. In Part 3, each of us will discuss how to interpret our parts and how the parts fit with the ensemble. We will give you tips on how to decipher some of the more difficult music you will come across, as well as some of the tricks of the trade. Each member will also address the word fill as it pertains to each of our parts. However, remember that the word fill does not mean a solo. This holds true for all the rhythm instruments. In most cases, a fill is a bridge between one section or another. Order is just an ornamentation to what is already happening in the piece of music. Anyhow, each of us will discuss this in more detail. I want to reiterate something I said in my opening remarks. We want everyone in the rhythm section to watch the entire segment. You will gain some valuable insight into what your fellow section players have to do in order to play their parts. As we said in the beginning, this really helps make a more cohesive section. The more you know how the section works, the more you will groove together. We will start Part 3 with Sergeant Major Dupin and the drums.
First, let's talk about what you see on the page when you look at a drum part. On a chart written for young bands, often the drum fills are written out. Arrangers do this to give you an idea of what to use in that spot, in case you need a helpful suggestion. Work on that written fill and see how it sounds there. However, feel free to try an idea of your own there. Sometimes the drum set the arranger heard in his head is tuned differently than yours, so the written fill doesn't sound quite right. Sometimes the fill was written on a computer program and is physically awkward to recreate. Or you might just have an idea of your own that's better. There are exceptions to this, however. If the drum part is cued on other parts of the arrangement, such as to set up a new tempo, then play what's written. Also, fills played by a drummer in a pit orchestra for a musical and especially for a choreographed dance routine, may be written because there are movements on the stage that match that written part. Another thing you see written out is the basic time pattern. This doesn't necessarily mean to just play basic time, especially if a soloist is improvising. Use your ears. Also, the written out bass drum part tells you that the bass player is walking forward of the bar as opposed to playing a 2-beat feel. If the music is stylistically from the swing era, playing the bass drum lightly, and I emphasize lightly, sounds good. Music of a more modern feel usually doesn't use a 4 on the floor type bass drum. Again, use your ears. If the part calls for time on the hi-hat, it's often notated like this. This sounds hokey. Play it like this. Don't open the cymbals all the way or it starts sounding hokey again. The sizzle of the two cymbals makes for a nice flowing sound. You have more control of the sound if the cymbals touch on the side toward you. This means the tilter underneath is toward you. As with everything else we've discussed, there's a lot of variations you can use. All the way closed or closed and tapping 2 and 4 on the stand. Drummers with Count Basie use that behind his piano solos. You can also bring your left hand into the act. Again, don't get so clever that you lose the swing feel. One of the main jobs of a drummer is to emphasize the dynamics in an arrangement. Remember, you're working with at least 6 levels of sound: pianissimo, piano, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, forte, and fortissimo. A drummer can play a wider range of dynamics than any horn player in the band. Use that to help the arranger get what he wanted. Be careful though. Brass players in younger bands can't control their tone at a fortissimo level sometimes, so the director may ask for less volume from the drums to keep the shout chorus from getting blatty sounding. This can be frustrating, I know, but remember, the better the band sounds, the better you sound. You're all up there on stage together. Arrangers often use a drum fill or a short solo to set up a change in dynamics. You see this a lot leading into a shout chorus. Getting louder comes pretty naturally to most drummers. After all, a big part of our job is to fire things up. Playing a fill to bring the volume down can be a little trickier sometimes. You've been romping and stomping your way through 16 or 32 bars of a shout chorus and the adrenaline's going, and all of a sudden it's up to the drummer to quiet things down, which can feel downright unnatural. You've really got to be thinking at this point. Don't move the tempo around, don't sound like you remembered the dynamic change at the last second, and don't forget to swing. Going from complex to simple rhythms can be very effective. A short solo of 4 or 8 bars can be a lot of fun to play. Again, be aware of where the music is going, and remember, the horns are counting on you to make them feel confident about where that entrance is. That's why drum fills are often called setting up the horns. Practice keeping the hi-hat going on 2 and 4. This will force you to keep thinking about playing in tempo. The key here is to not sound like 3 tennis shoes in a clothes dryer. Ending the short solo with a fairly simple idea raises the comfort level for everybody. The key to setting up rhythmic figures with the horns is to first get comfortable leaving and returning to the ride cymbal pattern. This is true anytime you learn a new timekeeping pattern, whether it's swing or sango. Spend a lot of time practicing this. Playing along with recordings is a big help because if you mess up, the drummer on the album is still there laying it down so you can jump back into it. Next, be aware of the accents in a figure. If you're looking at a bar of continuous eighth notes that are swung, listen to the melodic peaks in the horn line. Do-ba-da-ba-do-ba. You could catch the accents simply with your snare and bass drum. You could set up the most important accent, in this case, the last note. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you could catch the whole figure. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first example might be used with, say, the trombones playing behind a soloist. The last example may be with a full band figure. Think about the length of the notes. Cymbal crashes are long sounds. A long quarter note and a short quarter note get a different treatment. Da-ba-do-dee, ba-ba. 1, 2, 3, 4. If the note is short, use a short sound. Or long, use a long sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba-ba-do-dee, ba-ba. Repetitive rhythms may not need to be caught at all. A figure like 1, 2, 1, and 1, and 1, and carries enough punch to use a simpler approach. A 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 1, and 1, and 1, and. Setting up that figure with a fill 8 bars in a row could sound annoying. If you need more excitement, hit a backbeat or use a shuffle. Or cymbal crashes are usually supported by the bass drum or left hand. This adds a lot of punch to the sound. Or there's one last fill we should talk about, and that's the one drummers play behind that last loud chord on a chart, like at the end of a bassy chart. Tink, 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 bam. Hit a big cymbal crash right with the band, and then just hit stuff. This is known as dumping the truck. That should give you a clue as to what to play. Watch the director, and on the cutoff, hit either a cymbal crash or a loud rim shot. Ding, ding, ding. You usually don't want to imply a tempo with your fills here. So remember, fills are there to move the intensity up or down, to lock the rhythms of the horn parts firmly into place, and to bring out the accents that make the music swing.
Because of the importance of the bass part to an arrangement, the bassist needs to be able to quickly grasp the feel and mood of the piece. Not only is it necessary to interpret the part in the proper style, swing, Latin, etc., but it is crucial for the bassist to be aware of different sections that might happen in the arrangement and how to support these sections effectively. By listening very carefully to the arrangement, the bassist will be able to get musical ideas or suggestions that will be able to help her or him play in the right mood. Simply put, everything the bassist plays should help establish the intended feeling of the arrangement. The basic role of the bass in large ensembles is to provide the foundation for the band. The bassist builds this foundation by providing, along with the drums, the feel and movement to the time, as well as outlining the chord changes. This foundation is further strengthened by providing support for the style of the arrangement, as well as providing a solid musical backdrop for the rest of the ensemble. Many big band arrangements of all styles use the bass as a solo instrument. This is a major difference between playing bass in a small group and a larger group. In smaller groups, the bassist is free to pretty much play whatever he or she wishes to. However, When you add many more instruments as well as specifically written arrangement, many parts of the arrangement become much more limiting. By including the bass in an instrumental solely, the bass is no longer simply providing the foundation. The bassist now finds that he or she is now part of a horn section and is playing much more of a melodic role in the ensemble. With this change of role, the bass must now read and interpret the soli lines as a horn player would, using the proper style and phrasing. Here's an example of how one-note samba incorporates the bass into a soli section. In this case, the material is being performed by the bass instruments of the ensemble and is a unison soli. Even though the line is in the lower part of the tonal range, this line, when properly played, provides the energy for the entire introduction. The last situation that the bassist can encounter is when the bass is required to play a solo or solo line. The bassist now must be able to switch gears and become a solo instrument. Many times, the bass line is exposed by the arranger and might be the only melodic or harmonic instrument playing. The bassist must have a strong grasp of the style of the passage and be able to precisely execute the solo material. An example of this is the opening of the arrangement of Caravan. Needless to say, the bassist must be able to play with confidence and keep the energy and focus of the arrangement moving forward. In the previous section, I discussed more general concepts relating to the overall function of the bassist and the bass part in a large ensemble. This next section will deal with much more specific elements of part interpretation and the various challenges that the bassist encounters. When the bassist is faced with interpreting a specific bass line or rhythmic figure, there are actually three basic parts that make up a written passage. These elements are the style of passage, swing, Latin, rock, etc., the specific notes or chord changes, if any, and the rhythmic pattern that is being used. All three of these elements must be blended and coordinated perfectly for the part to be played properly. It is necessary for the bassist to have a strong grasp of each of these three parts. In other words, the bassist will need to have a strong understanding of different styles, chords and chord progressions, the fingerboard of the bass, and interpretation of various rhythms. Successful execution of these bass lines is also dependent on other musical elements. These elements include playing with a strong, precise time feel, developing reading skills to a high degree, awareness of intonation, which is crucial for the acoustic bass, and playing at a balanced volume level with a clear, controlled sound, and developing great listening habits or good ears. Occasionally, the bassist finds a written figure that uses chord changes instead of specific bass notes with the rhythm. In a situation like this, the bass is expected to play the root of the chord with the appropriate rhythm. However, if the rhythm and chord changes are complicated, this can be quite difficult to read. A better way to have written the figure is to have written the chord roots with the rhythm. The bassist may have to write the root notes over the rhythm until the figure is comfortable to read. While most of the time the bassist will want to play written parts exactly as written, there are a few situations where the part can actually be improved. One such situation is found in many traditional swing arrangements. Often the bass part will be written out, usually consisting of walking quarter notes as well as the chord symbols above the notes. Many arrangers write their bass parts defensively due to the fact that the arrangement may be played by bass players with different levels of reading ability. Many inexperienced bassists aren't able to effectively create bass lines from chord symbols alone. By including the chord changes with the part, the arranger is telling the bassist that he or she is free to create his or her own bass lines built on the chord changes, but can use the written line as a backup. Another way to improve a written bass part is to add your own ideas to the basic part. Again, many arrangers underwrite their bass parts, relying on the bassist's musical abilities to improve the part. These are fairly advanced concepts and should be applied only after the bassist has developed a good working knowledge of constructing bass lines. Equally challenging to reading specifically written parts is interpreting slash notation. Although it can be intimidating, it can also be the most creative opportunity for the bassist. The inexperienced bassist, upon seeing slashes and chords, may say to himself, "Now what?" Except for the suggested style and the chord symbols on the part, there really is nothing for the bassist to rely on. The bassist now must rely on his or her experiences in whatever style the arrangement is written in. It would take an entire video to discuss the many approaches to the many different styles that could be chosen from. In general, the bassist must be able to take ideas from the arrangement and mix them with his own creative ideas and write an effective bass part using the proper rhythmic pattern. The bassist must also be able to understand the chord progression and know how to apply the chords. The resulting bass part, however, does not have to be complicated or flashy. Quite often, the part calls for a very simple approach. For example, an arranger has noted at the beginning of the chart that the style is a rock ballad. The bass part has a set of chords with slashes under them. Assuming the bassist has played a rock ballad before and understands the basic chord progression, the bassist should be able to write an effective bass part using a basic rock rhythm pattern with the chord changes. Obviously, the more demanding the arrangement or style of the arrangement, the more experience and knowledge the bassist will need to have to interpret a particular style. The main concept to remember is that anything that you play must fit within the style and mood of the arrangement and should make good musical sense. In many arrangements, the bassist will encounter sections of slash notation followed by a section of written bass lines or a soli figure. The bassist in this case is expected to provide a smooth transition between the two notations. If the slash notation section is in a Latin style, chances are this transition will be easier due to the limitations placed on Latin bass lines. For example, here's the section from one note samba where the section of slash notation goes into a rhythm section soli figure and then back to slash notation. With a swing part, the transition between notations can be somewhat more challenging. Basically, the bassist has to be aware by looking or thinking ahead of what material is coming up in the next section and how to smoothly go into this next section. By using good voice leading and playing in the proper register, these transitions can be made very smoothly. Due to the freedom that slash notation allows, the bassist can now use fills to further enhance the part. Bass fills most of the time happen at the end of phrases and are used to lead the band and the listener into the next phrase or section of the arrangement. Because a bass fill temporarily takes the bass out of the basic time-keeping role, the fill has to be played with a well-defined time feel and should make good rhythmic sense. Swing fills quite often use a descending triplet rhythm with the note leading to the downbeat of the next bar. A simplified fill can be used on the downbeat of the measure using a figure of an eighth note followed by a dotted quarter note. Did you notice how the second note, the third of the chord, rebounds off the first note or the root of the chord? Because of the strength of this fill, many bassists use this fill to add direction and variety to their bass lines. Funk or rock fills can be more involved and usually involve 8th and 16th note rhythms. Here is an example of a rock ballad fill. Here's an example of a fingered funk fill. And finally, here's an example of a fill using a thump and popping technique. A great way to approach the rhythmic pattern for a fill, especially for funk and rock, is to think like a drummer. In other words, the pattern should be used to give a clear rhythmic direction for the rest of the ensemble. It is important to always be listening to the drummer, especially at the end of phrases and sections, so as not to conflict with any fills that the drummer might play.
Since I play in a big band, the swing style is a major part of my musical experience. Freddie Green was Count Basie's guitarist and the eminent rhythm guitarist of the big band era. He avoided solos but laid down a driving rhythm that helped the band swing. His approach was simple, and his chord voicings allowed the guitar to speak, yet not get in the way of other players. As I play this example, notice that I concentrate on 2 or 3 notes in each chord. Too many notes can sound muddy. Also keep a driving 4 to the bar rhythm while accenting beats 2 and 4. I realize most young guitarists just have one guitar, and probably a solid body at that, so I'll demonstrate this technique on my solid body as well to show you that the effect can still be achieved. What you want to do is turn your volume about halfway down and your tone control about halfway down. And also you want to strike your strings a little harder to bring out the sound. This should get you more of an acoustic setting. So far we've been looking at chord changes and background rhythms. Sooner or later you'll need to play written lines. Let's look at some practice techniques which should be more productive than simply turning down the volume. When I first look at a line, I find the highest notation in the phrase and use a hand position that will facilitate smooth technique. Of course, not all lines will connect smoothly. When you have trouble, play with a metronome and start slowly. Gradually increase your speed until you can play it easily at the proper tempo. If you have a line or solo to play with a horn section, listen carefully to that section. You'll need to phrase and articulate the same way as in horns. Now I'm going to slowly play the opening line to Project J. Notice the D is the highest note in the phrase, and I will base my playing around that note. I'll also switch positions to accommodate the other notes and to make the line smoother. Experimenting with different positions is the only answer to a smooth line. Here are a few final elements for good section playing. Don't play too loudly. Blender balance is most noticeable when you don't do it. If you can't hear everybody in the section clearly, then you're too loud. I'd rather be told to turn up than to turn down. Don't play constantly. Laying out can be just as important. During solos, the piano guitar should take turns copying backgrounds. This adds variety and helps support the soloist. Listen to the players around you. What you play must fit in rhythmically and harmonically with what the other players are doing. Listening to recorded music should be a part of your continued education, especially recordings in the styles you are practicing. Listen to live music whenever possible. As a big band guitarist, your role is most often a supporting one. There is still plenty of room for creativity, though, and the styles and elements we've discussed will help you make the most out of your practice.
The piano part in a big band runs the gamut from being totally written out to nothing but chord symbols and slashes. One thing is for certain, though. You have a lot of freedom in what you play or don't play. It is challenging and rewarding. Knowing what must be played and what is a guide is often very difficult to figure out. When you start to get into more advanced music, it becomes less difficult to figure out because most of your part will be chords and slash marks. So when you see figures written out, you know the arranger intended for them to be played. Generally, parts like this are intended to be guides. If you were to go back and listen to the original, you would find that the pianist did not play what's on this part. Other times, your part may be a conductor's part that is also a piano part. In both of these cases, you can play what's written. However, not only will it be way too busy, but it doesn't give you the freedom and creativity that the piano part should be. The best way to get around this is to go through and write the chords on top of each measure. Then go through and decide which rhythmic parts you should play with the band and highlight them. After you're finished, you would be able to play the part like this. If the part starts to look too confusing or you have a hard time reading it, create a whole new part consisting of chord symbols and slash marks. Notate the rhythms you want to play with the band. This makes a lot of the older manuscript a lot easier to read and a lot more fun to play. The type of manuscript that you most often must read in your high school ensemble looks like this. The part is written so that both pianists who can't read chord symbols and someone who knows chords and comping can read this part. The problem is that most pianists don't know the difference. What happens in these type of parts is that you might have a bass line written in the left hand and chord comping written out for the right hand. When you play the bass line, the left hand either doubles or plays completely different notes than the bass player. This only makes the bass part more cumbersome, while the right hand most often plays the same rhythm over and over. This is not what the piano part's supposed to do. You're supposed to add to the excitement and groove of the piece. If you don't know chord symbols, learn them. There's a whole different style of playing waiting to be explored. If you read chord symbols, create your own comping and use the rhythms as a guide. Most often, the parts that must be played are marked solo. When you see the word solo on the part, you know the arranger intended for you to play the line. The rest is just a guide, and that's how you should use it. There are certain types of writing that I feel we need to cover. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you some pointers that will make playing these parts a little easier. The first type are parts that are written for you without the ensemble. In other words, they are harmonic and rhythmic parts that the arranger wants you to play, but no one else in the ensemble has them, and they're not solos. Most often I find that younger players either shy away from these type of parts or they play them as if they were solo. Either way is incorrect and takes away from the performance. Remember, if the line were in a chart that had chords and slashes the rest of the time, but the word solo was not over top, it is meant to be played as is. The only thing you need to watch out for is, of course, the dynamics. Make sure you play at the dynamics written, but don't be afraid to play the part. Here's an example. As you heard, I blended with the band without being too loud or soft. The next type of part is one that is written with the ensemble. That is, it is written out part that is intended to be a part of what the ensemble is playing. Now you're probably wondering what the difference is between this and the previous example we were talking about. Well, when you first look at the music, nothing. In fact, you won't know until you play it that it is with the ensemble. However, once you play it with the ensemble, then there are a whole lot more things you need to worry about compared to our previous example. First, you need to blend. Depending on where the part is written, you could be playing with one of the sections or the entire ensemble. Either way, you must blend. If you're playing with the trumpets and mutes, you would have to play much softer than trumpets without mutes. You can't just let your dynamic marking be the final word on blending either. You always have to be listening. Sometimes a piano marking isn't soft enough, or vice versa. Always listen. The second consideration you have is interpretation. Is the ensemble playing certain notes longer than others? Are they laying back on a certain section? Are they playing certain parts straight while swinging others? All these questions have to be addressed, and many times while you're playing. That is why I keep stressing listening. Sure, all these things can be worked out in rehearsal, but we are all human, and some days the same line might be played slightly different. And if you weren't paying attention, you're wrong. Always listen. Here are some examples. As you heard, my part was written with the trombones. With the piano on the electric piano setting, it is easy to play too loud compared to the trombone because of the difference in sound. Plus, the trombone can negotiate this line in a more legato style, so I have to be careful that I blend with their style. In the next example, I'm scored with the entire ensemble, so I need to play the interpretation with the ensemble. The piano is going to add color in this situation because there's no way I could play as loud as the ensemble. The important thing in this situation is to play the correct interpretation, making sure to play and cut off with the ensemble. Another situation that pianists find a lot in their part is rhythmic notation with chord symbols. You can find this situation with the ensemble or by yourself, so all the things we talked about in the previous examples hold true here. What I want to do here is give you some tips. First of all, be able to move between your chords with ease, as I discussed in our clinic books. If you have problems playing your chords with ease, you will have an extremely hard time playing this style. Once you are comfortable with your chords, you can easily play this style by moving back and forth between your practiced inversions. Here's what I mean. If you play your D major 7 chord in this position, your G major 7 chord in this position, and so on, there's nothing wrong with playing this line like this. 2, 3, 4. It helps when you practice this type of notation very slow. It's like learning to read. You're trying to get several skills to work simultaneously, and it won't work and will be very frustrating if you try to move too fast. For the more advanced player, try creating a counter melody line when you have this type of notation. Again, there's nothing wrong with playing this line the way I just showed you, but it is fun and more challenging, not to mention what it adds to the piece of music, to play this type of notation moving between inversions. Here's what I'm talking about. 2, 3, 4. The last type of notation I want to talk about is when you combine all of the previous notations into one part. It looks like this. Here we have the exact part written out. Here we have chords and slashes, and here we have rhythmic notation with chord symbols. As you can see, it can get quite confusing. The best way to practice parts like this, after you get the parts under your fingers that are technically challenging, is to work on the transition between each type of notation. In other words, work these 4 bars here, get used to where your hands will be, and smooth out the rough parts. Here's what I mean. By working on these transition bars, you are training yourself to move between the different types of notation with ease. As is the case with everything we've discussed in this video, always work on these problem areas slow, gradually picking up the tempo only when you're comfortable at the current tempo. I'm going to play a portion of this piece of music to give you an idea of how to move between the different notations with ease. 3, 4. The last topic I want to discuss in this section is the word fill. This is a very personal subject in that it is up to each individual player's discretion as to what he plays when he sees this word. Many of the world's best jazz pianists are easily recognizable just by what they play when they play fills. All you have to do is pick up any Count Basie recording and even start it in the middle of the tune. As soon as you hear that 1 or 2 wonderfully placed notes, you know it's the count. Or hear a rapid arpeggio in the middle of a phrase during a solo piano performance and know it's Oscar Peterson. In other words, it's up to the individual what he plays during the short bridges between phrases we call fills. One thing that all great players have in common is that when they play fills is knowing what's appropriate and stylistically correct. Many a great performance can be ruined by 2 or 3 beats of a fill that has nothing to do with the arrangement, style, groove, or feel of a tune. I'm not going to tell you what to play when you see the word fill. As I just said, it's a very personal thing. However, the main thing to remember, as I said in the introduction to Part 3, is that a fill is not a solo. It is a way of getting from one phrase to another. You are simply adding a line or a note that will connect one segment of music to another. Think of it this way. When you're writing a sentence or a paragraph, you wouldn't use a word or a group of words that have nothing to do with the subject that you're writing about. Otherwise, your sentence or paragraph wouldn't make any sense. Well, the same holds true for a fill. As long as your note or group of notes is stylistically and musically correct, anything goes. As in improvisation, the best way to work on being able to play good fills is to listen to recordings. Count Basie and Duke Ellington were the masters at playing great fills in a big band. Many times all it took was one note or one chord, but that one idea made the entire phrase stand out. Listen to what came before the fill and what came after the fill to best figure out what they played and why they played it. Remember, a fill is not a solo. Even though it does stand out in most cases, it is a bridge between phrases. Well, that brings us to the end of our video. We hope that you've enjoyed understanding the big band rhythm section. I hope that we've answered most of your questions and solved most of the problems you've had in your section. Better yet, we really hope that we've gotten you on your way to providing the kind of backbone your big band needs to become a grooving band. Thanks for listening.